Hello, my name is Michelle Woodson, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer for Orange County Schools. I'm so excited that you're going to be with us today as we're talking about the MTSS implementation for Orange County and what exciting things are coming in the future. On the screen, you will see multiple initiatives that have come from state and federal programs as we're trying to seek better means really across the nation to think about how we serve students and what structures we're putting in our schools to ensure that we're making the best decisions possible for students. The MTSS process is one additional structure that really combines all of these initiatives in one place. It is a framework for our thinking. It is the way we design our instruction and consider what is best for students. In the past, you will notice that the MTSS structure or the RTI structure has really been seen as a special education initiative rather than a means for continuous improvement for all aspects of the school environment. In the future, you will also be aware that the MTSS process will be used for student eligibility into the specific learning disabled process for the year 2020. However, there is so much more to this MTSS structure, and what we want to focus on is how this core framework helps us build the school environment that will ensure success for students. There is a very strong research base for the MTSS process. This is one particular study that you may want to look at that comes out of Kansas as a state implementation model. However, there are many other authors who have monitored the implementation of the MTSS process and have found positive results. It is a fluid process with many components. There is not one particular thing that's going to make this work or not. However, we know that as a school and as a school district, it will be important for all stakeholders to be involved as we're trying to plan for an effective implementation as we move forward. School improvement structures that you may have been familiar with in the past include all of these components: PLCs, effective what we call core instruction, more conversation to come on that, supplemental instruction, which we term as what is in addition to the core or might be termed as an intervention process, behavior, how we monitor progress, our assessment plans, and what we do really just to problem solve. How do we think through that? All of those things are a part of how we improve our practice, be it in the classroom, at the school level, and at the district level. All of these components have to work together. We also see this MTSS structure as a means to ensure equity for all students. This is a graphic that I've certainly seen many times, and it really illustrates well how challenging the MTSS structure or any school structures can sometimes be, and how we want to sometimes give the very same thing to every student, because in that way of thinking, equality seems to be the fairest way to provide resources. However, what we know is not all kids need the same thing, and we have to think differently about what we're providing. What our ultimate goal is this next slide, where we're really seeing that the actual barrier is removed altogether. Not only are we providing the right resources to the right students at the right time, but we're really thinking through structures and processes across the district that will eliminate barriers for students of any kind based on any possible structure that might exist. So you will see a lot of equity work in the MTSS process. This is a graphic that shows outcome data over a 5-year period of time. And ultimately, what I hope that you can see out of this data is what we are determining, and this is not just an Orange County story, but it is a story for, honestly, districts across the state of North Carolina and across the nation. What we see is that we have predictable outcomes. The outcomes for various students based on their subgroups are predictable based on their race in this particular graphic in many cases. We don't want to see that kind of predictability for any student. What we want to see is the ability for all students to have equal access across the board as they're moving through their educational career in Orange County. One of the ways in which we will ensure that that happens is by utilizing a common database tool. The database tool that Orange County will use, the state of North Carolina has adopted, is called the TIPS model, Team Initiated Problem Solving Model. And what's specific about this, it's really no different than other continuous improvement models that you might have seen in the past. But we are really focusing on using data, collecting and utilizing data throughout the process. It doesn't happen at one point, it happens continually, and that we may have to start by identifying a problem. We might ultimately move to developing a hypothesis about it, and then once we look at the data, we might ultimately determine even at that point that that's not the correct problem, and we might have to return back to identifying the problem. The point being is that you don't necessarily get into a cycle of improvement, and just because you're at a point in the cycle, you move through. We want to make sure that we are thoughtful and we are problem solving all the way through. What's different in the MTSS structure is some changes in the way we approach things, right? We're going to move from a procedural focus, focused on just filling out a checkbox, to really an instructional focus. We don't want to just list a bunch of to-dos. We want you to really be thinking your way through this process. We want families to think through this process. We want all elements of our organization to think through this process. We are hoping that we are sharing our knowledge with one another so that we are all collectively on the same page about where we're headed. We're focused on making sure we have positive outcomes across the board for students and for our schools. And we want to really focus on the whole child as a general education student, regardless of their educational needs, because they're in their regular education setting is where they're ultimately going to be gaining the skills and the knowledge that they need to be successful. In the past, you may have been familiar with a responsiveness to instruction model, which I already referred to, and also a PBIS, or positive behavior intervention support structure. The reality is, what's really different about the MTSS structure, these two models move together into a multi-tiered system of support. The idea being that we use tiers of support in order to find support for all students as they move through the educational process. Once a student is defined at risk for behavior, we know that students that might struggle with behavior practices in classrooms might also have academic concerns. The same is true the other direction. Students who might have concerns for academics are often the students that we have challenges with behavior. That's why we don't want to look at one system in isolation of another. It is critically important that we think about how behavior impacts academics and how academics then impact the behavior structures. In the state of North Carolina, this is the actual definition of the North Carolina MTSS structure. It is a framework that promotes school improvement through engaging research-based academic and behavioral practices. It does employ a systems approach to utilizing a data-driven problem solving to maximize growth for all. So this is about students at risk at many times, but it is about the typical student in a classroom. It is about the gifted student in a classroom. This structure is for all of us to utilize and think about what is working and what is not working in our school buildings, in our classrooms, and in our district as a whole. In the multi-tiered system of support, you will notice that it is important for us to have an effective core instructional model. Core is what is provided to all students. It is their first time instruction. The supplemental is in addition to the core, and then the intensive is in addition to the supplemental. This is an effective way for all structures to make sure that we are providing the needed supports for students who might need something more. It's also important for us to think about how we look at our resources. The reality is that in a tiered support model, we have students who are gaining more and more need, also needing more and more resources. So as a classroom, as a school, and as a school district, we have to think about how this tiered support structure also causes us to think about how resources are allotted. So what does effective implementation of MTSS look like at the school level? It does mean that you should be seeing a database decision-making process happening at the school level and at the PLC level and in your classroom as well. All of those groups of people or individuals must be a part of using data to reflect on what is working and what is not. All problem solving considers academic and behavior together. Remember, we've already talked about how it's so important to realize that academics do impact behaviors for students and behaviors impact the academics for students. We don't want to think about students in silos anymore. We again want to focus on that whole child. Additionally, as a school-based team is responsible for monitoring the health of what's working in the core instruction in your building, you should be seeing that out of your MTSS teams, but you also should be seeing that from your PLCs. And we also want to ensure that parents are engaged in this process. In the next year, you will start to see some district-led events for families so that they will become more and more familiar with the MTSS structures and what they can expect for their students. We have stakeholders at all levels of our organization involved in this process. We want to make sure that we are all consistently saying the same thing and have a clear understanding about what expectations are for the MTSS implementation and for MTSS effectiveness to occur. So what is problem solving? When you're problem solving in your classroom as a teacher, in your PLC, at the school level with regards to the MTSS teams, it's an inquiry-based process, right? You're designed to define and analyze and address identified problems. It is important that it's collaborative and that you have the right stakeholders involved in the process and that you're thinking through that and that it is data-based for efficient, effective action planning and intervention. It's also an opportunity for each level of the organization to examine barriers. We should all be aware of where there are challenges in our organization in order for effective change to occur. So it's important that we are all systematically thinking as we are problem solving, rather again than just filling out a checkbox. This is a graphic from Implementation Science. There are researchers at the University of North Carolina that are heavily invested in what really determines effective implementation of really anything. If you will notice, the graphic indicates that there are competency drivers, organizational drivers, and leadership drivers that try to ensure that as an organization implements anything, that we are making sure that we're thinking through all of the systems and structures that need to be in place so that we create a consistent implementation process that will happen no matter what. This is why we are using this particular model, this continuous improvement model, in order to ensure that the MTSS process will be successful for all students across the organization and will happen over time. That begins with a healthy core, and we're going to talk when we keep saying what is core instruction, this is exactly what we're talking about. Tier 1 or core begins with clear goals. What is it we want to teach kids? How will we know if we've done that? And what do we do if they don't know it or they do know it? So what do we do next? That's the instructional decision making that we have in place. You will have a year-long process of learning specifically about that in the K-8 structure with regards to the PLC training that will be happening at your school and with your teams. So questions 1 and 2 ensure a guaranteed and viable core instruction. We also have to think about that core instruction through this lens. We call this ISIL, which stands for Instruction, Curriculum, Environment, and Learner. Instruction is how you teach. What exactly do you do? It is the pedagogy that is involved. The curriculum is what you teach. What specifically are the resources that you are putting in front of students, and how did you come to decide upon those resources or to ensure that those resources are aligned to standards? The environment in which you teach in, that's the literal four walls of a classroom, but it could be the outside if you have a class outside one day. It could be the centers that you might set up in your classroom. It's a variety of decisions that you as the adult make about the environment that students are in which they're learning. And then ultimately it is about the learner themselves. Who are these students that you're teaching? And what do you know about them? And how do you design instruction for those individuals? Core instruction in Orange County is being defined on a continual basis, and these are some of the core elements that you can see at place in the 18-19 school year. For sure, you should be able to see Letterland in K2 classrooms. Every K2 classroom should have Letterland enacted. The Lucy Calkins units of study should be visible in K through 8 classrooms. You should be able to see the workshop pedagogy happening in all classrooms K-8 and really moving into the high schools where you're thinking about what is it you show and teach and demonstrate and model for all students? What do you provide for small groups of students? How do you as the teacher become a facilitator of learning focused on learning goals for students? And how do students engage in that process? What allows them the voice and choice to make specific decisions as they're moving through their educational process? You will also see common resources being provided in mathematics, elementary for bridges, for secondary Discovery Math textbook, for 6 through 12 math instruction. You should see common formative assessments as a part of your regular instructional monitoring process. We have new processes in place for vetting new instructional resources. And we also have a technology platform for all students that ensures a viable one-to-one initiative where students have access to technology. And how are we leveraging that technology to embed our effective core curriculum practices? So how will we measure the effectiveness of the district implementation? We will monitor student and teacher district data points as well as the implementation data points along the way. We will use as a district team the TIPS protocol to continue the decision-making process. And we will utilize a tool called the SAM, which is the self-assessment for MTSS implementation, which will be a data point for continuous improvement. Each school MTSS team should have already assessed themselves on this SAM. The district team will also use that SAM data to monitor the implementation of the MTSS structures for improvement. I want to come back to the behavior process and think specifically about the components of what is Tier 1 effective core for student behavior across the district. What you see here are elements that should be in your classrooms. They should be in your schools to ensure that students know and are aware of what are the expectations for them for behavior in school. I do also want to mention that we will be moving towards more and more of the restorative practices model, which you should be somewhat familiar with. There will be additional trainings this year, but in addition to that, we want to think about what we are doing for students to ensure that their restorative structures are in place. Those practices will be embedded in a new code of conduct, which will be launched for the 1920 school year, but will be heavily thought through in the 1819 school year. Please be looking for and thinking about what are the behavior practices you have in your classroom, your PLC utilizes, your grade level content area utilizes, your school utilizes to ensure that we have consistency and expectation for students. You should see problem solving happening at all levels of the organization of Orange County Schools. You should see that we are using the very same practices for MTSS implementation at the district level. You should see those practices being used at your building level, at your grade level or content level. You should be using them as a teacher in your classroom, and ultimately the greatest possibility would be the implementation of this for students in their class, in their own thinking as well. MTSS and continuous school improvement is a comprehensive approach to school improvement. This is an implementation timeline to give you a gauge as to where we have been and where we are heading. In the 17-18 school year, school teams received training on core instruction implementation, thinking about infrastructures for effective practices in their buildings, teaming structures, who are on the right teams, and are there feedback loops for those teams to make sure that students are getting what is needed, and master schedule. Are we ensuring that all students are scheduled for the right courses, the right classes, so that we are meeting their needs? The district teams will be reviewing the implementation and training and planning for the 18-19 school year and the 17-18 year that occurred. And the district began a reflection process on the infrastructures ourselves at the district level as a part of the MTSS process. For this next school year, school teams will be monitoring school core instruction, implementation of core and group plans for students who are at risk, and then we will be monitoring and the implementation of core behavior expectations. Teachers will implement core effective instructional practices in curriculum and reflect on student outcomes and make needed adjustments. The district as a whole will review current intervention structures. We will prepare for a standard treatment protocol process and current eligibility infrastructures, as well as create district and school infrastructures for that tiered support model. In the 1920 school year, we will practice the implementation of the tiered system of support with regards to ensuring that, again, that core instruction is happening, and we will actually move through the practice of monitoring students moving through the tiered support structure and the data that is collected from that. The district will review and make mid-course corrections as necessary, and we will have final preparations completed for the 2020 eligibility determination. In July of 2020, it will be important for Orange County Schools to ensure that we have a solid core instruction, that we have solid and consistent tiered intervention structure in place with a standard treatment protocol, that we have stakeholders at all levels of the organization aware of the thinking involved in this tiered system of support, that we are focused on preventative measures rather than responding to emergencies that occur, and that we are thinking about a solid database decision-making model continually as we're moving through the organization. So what is the role of the classroom teacher? For this next year, we need the classroom teacher to be focused on effective core instruction. That includes all elements of core instruction. What are you providing? When are you providing it? What does it look like? Again, remember that instruction, curriculum, environment, and then learner structure. We want to make sure that classroom teachers are aware of the data that they are gathering and that they're thinking systematically about that data in their classroom and at the PLC level. And that instructional decision making is taking place as a result of the data. Looking at the data and just simply admiring it will not move us forward. It's the decisions that we make as a result of that data that will make life change for students. So we are shifting from SST to MTSS structures. And as we move through the 2018-19 school year, you will begin to see a transition from those SST structures to the MTSS structure. This transition will occur specifically as teams are going to be expecting that teachers will come to the table with knowledge of their core instruction and its effectiveness. They will also expect that teachers are aware of the success of all the learners in their classroom in the core, as well as the success of small groups, and then specifically the individual learner. We will have more details of this process as we move forward and progress through this school year. So what questions do you have for us? In this course, this Canvas course, there will be an opportunity for you to upload specific questions that you can ask about the MTSS process and what we are providing or things that we could be doing differently. We want to make sure we have an interactive process and feedback loops where all stakeholders are involved. We're looking forward to this journey with you. There's no member of this organization that can do this work alone. And this is heavy work, there's no doubt, but it's the right work. It is the best that we can provide for our students. And at each level of the organization, at each component of the MTSS structure, we all must be committed to doing what's right for our kids in order to ensure that we are doing what's right across the board for our organization. I'm excited to be on this journey with you. I look forward to where we're headed in the future. Thank you.